The rebuttal was beautiful. I'm surprised that most people don't bring it up. Ben Gurion himself, the Palestinians, he does believe, do descend from Jews that were farmers 2,000 years ago. And you don't need to be Einstein to know this. But if you need him, here's what he says. So 1973, this is where you see the first argument made that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. What causes anti-Semitism is when they justify what they do by saying, that sounds pretty anti-Semitic to me. And he never said that they hate Jews. He actually said, I can see where they're coming from. We're invaders, we're foreigners. If you are against Jewish self-determination, you're anti-Semite. Oh, but for Arabs, it's not absolute right for them. In the exact same article.
The arrogance.
You couldn't make up this level of arrogance. And you know what? The truth is even more ridiculous. And when you know why it will shock you, and it's not for the reasons you think, right, you're gonna be shocked. We're gonna get to that though.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters and friends. This is Hamza Andres Sozis, and welcome to the next episode of Islam 21C's podcast, On Guard. Now, I want to thank you, every single one of you, for making it successful so far. Please share and subscribe. Now, this episode is epic. It's amazing. It's with our dear brother, Abdullah Al-Andalusi. And he dismantled a whole host of Zionist claims, the false Zionist narratives. And before we get into the podcast, let me quickly introduce him. And I'm telling you, you're going to enjoy every moment. So, Abdullah Al-Andalusi is an international speaker, thinker, and intellectual activist for Islam and Muslim affairs. He is a researcher for the I3 Institute, an instructor and head of the Department of Occidentology at the Quran Institute, and co-founder of the discussion forum, the Muslim Debate Initiative. For 20 years, his work has been in explaining and demonstrating the intellectual proofs for the Islamic belief system, promoting the Islamic way of life and Islamic solutions for contemporary problems, and advocating for the rights of Muslims across the world. Abdullah has taught a number of courses and has given a variety of lectures at universities and colleges internationally, but he is better known for his numerous TV appearances and public debates. Enjoy the podcast. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi.
My dear brother Abdullah, how are you?
I'm good, alhamdulillah.
May Allah bless you. I'm good, I can't complain. So it's without a doubt, for people of conscience and people who have any humanity left in them, that there is an ongoing genocide and starvation. And you're the best person to speak about this topic. We have a bunch of questions. I'm going to go straight to the first one because we want to dismantle false Zionist narratives. And the first question is, bro, do Palestinians have a right to the land of Palestine?
Well, I wouldn't say I was the best person to speak to about it. There are great literary and academic giants that have written tons of books on this topic. So all I can say is I'm the one present right now to speak to you. So inshallah, bismillah. So it might seem like a very simple question, a question that even does not need to be asked. Like what right do people who live in their land have a right to be in their land? But as a friend of mine said, sometimes in certain situations, the hardest thing to explain to people is, as he says, the bloody obvious. And in this case, the bloody obvious, or the bleedingly bloody obvious, is that the Palestinians have been dehumanized and they've been viewed as not human and not subject to the same rights that we would convey to others. I think there was an infamous situation where someone maybe put on ChatGPT, they asked, you know, do Jews have a right to live in Palestine or Israel? And they'll say, of course, every nation has a right to self-determination and Jews have the right to self-determination too. And then when they ask the same question, do Palestinians have the right to live in Palestine? And they say, this is a complicated question and there's many factors and many different sides. So this is one of the issues. So put simply, they do have a right to live in their own land, the land that they've been living in. But what is typical from Zionist interlocutors and what was infamous from interviews with, for example, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and Jordan Peterson, which I saw, and I responded to with obviously with a colleague of yours, Dr. Mohammed Hijab, was they argued that Palestinians are newcomers to the land. And they'll say, well, then they don't have no right to be there, but they imply that Jews have a better right to be there, and therefore Palestinian considerations and rights should take a second place. So what we really need to go in is to just look at the history, and I have a little bit of a history lesson, but I'll make it as brief and as painless as possible. So in essence, there's multiple genetic studies have been done on Palestinians as well as Jews from around the world. And they compared it to like bodies that were exhumed with the DNA that was found in Megiddo up to 4,000 years ago. So in the Canaanite era, this is obviously the pre-biblical era. And of course, they discovered that, to no one's real surprise, there's a match between Palestinians. Palestinians generally have roughly 70% correspondence to 70 to 90% corresponds to ancient Canaanite DNA from the region, with Jews actually varying depending on the region they come from. So if they're from the Middle East, a bit more correspondence, not more than Palestinians, but they have more than European Jews. So roughly maybe 60, 50%, and then European Jews between 50 to 40%. When looking at European Jewish DNA, they discovered, of course, that they also have 50% roughly on average European DNA because they've lived in Europe for 2,000 years and they've intermarried, although not as much as other European groups, but they certainly have intermarried Europeans and have European maternal lines. Now, I don't think we need to go to genetics on this, but let's rewind the clock and explain, and then we'll discuss where the Palestinians come from. So you had the Canaanites up until about roughly around 1200 BC. We know that there was no Israelite rule there because Egypt was ruling Palestine at that point in time, or Canaan as it was called. Then there was the Bronze Age collapse, long story, and they withdrew from that land. And then you had Canaanite city-states. We see in Meneptah stele, which is a kind of engraving onto by the Egyptian monarch, engraving of his victories and conquests. So we see, dated around 1208 BC, that he talks about them going back into Palestine, not conquering it, but reducing the land and subjugating the Canaanite city-states. And then he refers to defeating, and he uses a hieroglyph denoting a tribe of people, not a land or a city, but a tribe of people known as, possibly, historians believe it's referring to Israel. The word is Yisrael, Israel. Mm-hmm. So they think they encounter, and the icon is actually for a group of people, not an area of land or a city-state like the Canaanite city-states that he mentioned in this stele. So historians have concluded that it seems like around 1208, by this point in time, Israelites had migrated, usually in where roughly is the West Bank today. They had migrated, and they were maybe semi-nomadic peoples. They weren't actual sedentary city dwellers of that land. If you add to that further, looking into the history, was that there was also a typical name for people who were nomads, mercenaries, and sometimes brigands, called Habiru. And some historians, actually quite a few historians, have said that it's possible that the term, Ivrit, which is in Hebrew, or Ibri, or the Hebrews, comes from this term meaning like these semi-nomadic brigands or fighters or mercenaries or what have you. So these were usually people for hire, and maybe it was a general term for a group of people that did this, and they were believed to be such a group, or one of these groups, and so they were given that name. These are the Habiru. These are just Habirus. And that's roughly where it believes comes from. So what we see is that the Israelites were semi-nomadic. They didn't exist prior to, there's no mention of them during the Egyptian imperial period of Palestine. So they seem to have come on the scene at a certain point in time. Now, the Hebrew Bible mentions an invasion of the Israelites coming in from Jordan. They cross over the river Jordan and they invade into the promised land of Palestine. for them. Now, this time it was just called Canaan, the land of Canaan. Okay, so then what happened? Well, long story short, going through 1,000 years, they split into two kingdoms. They became one. So 12 tribes became one kingdom under. It's believed maybe King Solomon, King David, alayhi salam. There is actually archaeological evidence for the house of David's mentioned, but not necessarily the king of David or king of Solomon. But that gives supporting weight, they say. Okay, and then they split the two kingdoms. One was called the Kingdom of Israel in the north, and the second underneath was called the Kingdom of Judea. Right? So, or the Kingdom of Judah, sorry, then would become Judea later. So then Babylonians, Assyrians invade, take them captive. Then you have Cyrus the Great, as he's called, Persian emperor. He allows the Israelites to go back to their land, but under imperial control of the Persians. But it was apparently a benign control. They were given autonomy and so on. They only really, and then it was, Alexander the Great comes in, he invades, he dies. One of his generals takes over the different parts of it splits into different pieces, and one of his generals takes over the area which we see of Egypt and Palestine, and then they establish a Hellenistic rule over there. Then there was an uprising, and now we're getting towards roughly now about 2,200 years ago or so, the Maccabean uprising. They actually defeat the Hellenists or Macedonians or Greeks and get some independence back. But this only lasts about 100 years, and then the Romans come on and first turn them into a client state, and then due to another uprising after the time of Jesus alayhi salam, it becomes a Roman territorial province. Now, the Greek historian Herodotus in 500 BC, that's 2,500 years ago, for those of you who want a rough understanding, obviously encounters that there's a coastal area around Gaza where there was people that settled there called the Philistines. The Philistine city-states. And so names the territory based on the people they encounter, which is, they call it, in essence, Palestinia or Palestina, as the Romans would probably call it. And this is typical in the ancient world. Like, for example, the Muslims called Europeans Farangi because we just encountered the Franks. There's more than just the Franks, but we just said, oh, they're all Farangi, English, whatever, Farangi. So Palestine actually is the name that was given to the land after Canaan. And most people don't realize, interestingly enough, and this is a side point, but Palestine has only actually had two names of the land in its time that encompasses the whole territory. Well, at least after the Egyptian withdrawal. One was Canaan, and after was actually Palestine. It was never actually called Israel as the name of the territory, as the name of the actual land. It's like we're living on the Isles of Britannia, right? The British Isles, or Britannia as the Romans called it. England is the name of the political jurisdiction, not the name of the actual physical land. The land is Britannia. So the physical land is Canaan or Palestine, but was never actually called, this land is Israel. It was called the land belonging to Israel in that sense. Land of Israel meaning belongs to the tribes of Israel. But we know the tribes of Israel is a tribe, as the Bible mentions. They even called Israel before they even go to Palestine. So they are a tribal people. So England is the land belonging to the Angles or the Saxons. It's not the name of the actual geographic territory. So this is where people often get confused. But anyway, so Romans turn into a province after a failed uprising around 70 CE, of the Common Era as they call it, or the Christian era. And for a good 600 years or so, it's under Roman rule. And people become Christian. So the natives slowly become Christian. Some leave. Actually, many Jews left before the uprising was crushed by the Romans. Because one of the typical Zionist narratives was they'll say, we were expelled from the land, we were made into exiles. And I was like, that's pretty hard to make that your narrative when the Talmud gets, in a sense, canonized in Palestine 200 or about 100 or 200 years after your supposed exile from Palestine. So who was doing the canonization? Right? It was the clerics, the rabbis, and so on and so forth. There was a Jewish population that remained. There were Jews that left and went into the Roman Empire for economic reasons by the tens of thousands prior to the Roman suppressing of the uprising against Roman rule in around 70 CE. So there was no evidence of a mass exile. And in fact, historians have pointed out that there was the actual farmers and tillers of the land and so on, but were by and large still, you might call Jews or others that were just living there that had been there for some time. So what happened then? Gradually, there was a mass conversion to Christianity that occurred as the Roman Empire was Christianizing. So Palestine became more and more Christian. We know that synagogues were converted into churches by their own congregation. Right? They had left Judaism and became Christian. Okay, and this all lasted until, of course, around the 8th century, 7th century, 8th century. Of course, when a new power rose up, which is obviously Islamic civilization, it spread. Prior to that time, by the way, people often tell you that Arabs come from Arabia, right? All Arabs, they come from Arabia. So if you see Arabs in Palestine, they are foreigners to that land. They come from Arabia. Well, not so on two counts, right? The first count is that the Sinai, not Sinai desert, but also the Naqab, or the Negev as they call it, has actually always had Bedouin Arab tribes even during the biblical period. So there's always been Arabs there, and there were Christian Arabs living around the whole region. Arabic was actually the lingua franca of that region. So there was no sudden influx by Muslims in the 7th century, but there was actually a lot of Christian Arabs. There was the Nabatean Empire, was an Arabic kingdom that controlled the Naqab and Jordan and that whole area. You can go see them, the remains of their stone cities, Petra and so on. So Arabs, in a sense, have been there for many, many centuries. But the new influx of Muslim Arabs coming from the Middle East obviously was 7th century. Okay, so what did they do when they reached Palestine? They did the same thing they did everywhere else, which is once they deposed the imperial overlords, they actually kept the administrators. That's why most of the early administration documents of the early caliphate is actually in Greek, because that was how administration was done. Strangely enough, you actually see the first the first Arabic Bibles at this point in time, when the Romans, because I think prior to, Christian Arabs had kept their sacred texts in Greek or Aramaic, but they started to translate into Arabic. But what you see generally is that the population does not move. Muslims never kick out anybody. The overlords change, yes, the military, those who inhabit the military barracks or the palaces might change, but the population doesn't move anywhere. So then what happened? Well, over many, many centuries, and actually it was very slow, but the population begins to slowly convert to Islam. So these were people who were maybe a mix of Canaanites, and we don't know if the Bible narrative is 100% accurate, that they massacred all the Canaanites when they came. Some evidence suggests that they intermarried, maybe they kept slaves, but whatever, the DNA is still there. The Canaanite DNA is still there. So they're Jews, and then from Jews they become Christians, and then they slowly start to convert to Islam. It comes to the point that by the turn of the 20th century, Palestine has approximately about 88% Muslims, 10% Christians, 4% Jews. And these are all Palestinians. These are people, the natives. Now, sure, there's been intermarrying and intermixing throughout the Middle East, but generally speaking, the genome of that region is more or less the same. Same with the Lebanese, same with the Egyptians. That they all look different from each other, even though they might be called Arabs. And that brings me to the second definition of the word Arab. Arab is anyone who speaks Arabic. If you adopt Arabic as your mother tongue, you become Arab. It doesn't matter what your ethnicity is. You're just called an Arab. Even though Egyptians, nobody would say, you're just all from Arabia because you're called Arabs. No, they say, well, yeah, you descend from the ancient Egyptians. No one has any confusion about Egyptians, even though they're called Arabs. But Zionists like to portray the Palestinians as, no, they are Arabians. not Arabs. So this is basically what happened, is that Palestinians are, there's a genetic continuity to ancient Canaanites 4,000 years prior. Interestingly enough, now, when you look at the DNA analysis of not just Palestinians, but they also compared it to Jews, European Jews, Arab Jews, as I mentioned before, there was a lot of surprising things they discovered. That there was a particular chromosome that goes in the male line, which about 30% of Palestinians have, but very rarely occurs in the Cohen line of Jews. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Cohen are like the priestly caste, and they that only carries via the male lineage, not by the female lineage. So to be a Jew, you must be from the female lineage, or your mother must be a Jew, but to be a Cohen, your father must be a Cohen. So they discovered that it's actually very rare this chromosome occurs amongst Kohanim, as they call it, the Kohens, but is actually quite preponderant amongst Palestinians. And there were studies to show that where they indicated that this seems that the Palestinians had preserved more of the DNA from that region than European Jews had preserved that ancient DNA. But there is still some traces amongst them of that, especially in the priestly caste. There was loads of studies to show that European Jews, they have actually 80% of their mitochondria, maternally passed mitochondria, are basically from European maternal lines. Now, I don't know what this means obviously in Jewish law in terms of what makes someone a Jew or not. They will definitely say you can convert, so as long as if you profess to be Jewish and you believe it, then you're Jewish. Generally, that's not an issue. But it can be passed racially, even if you identify as an atheist, for example. They say, well, you can still be called a Jew. Although if you actually are a Muslim or Christian, they would not consider you to be obviously racially a Jew anymore. And the laws, the racial laws of Israel actually reflect this. So if you are an atheist, you say, I reject God, I reject everything about the Bible, I reject the Talmud, everything about that history. My mum is just a Jew, but that's it. You have the right to return, quote unquote. Israel gives you the racial right to return back to Palestine. But if you are if you're Cohen on both sides of your family, right? Even your mother's a Cohen, let's just say, right? You are like card-carrying, ultra-Orthodox rabbis on both sides of your family, like 100%, 110% Jewish, you could say. But you are a Christian or you're a Muslim, then Israel does not consider you have the right to return to Palestine. So their racial laws, because that is literally a racial law, makes an exceptions for religion. It's not about all religion, it's also about race. But you apparently can lose your race and lose your inheritance, your birthright, if you follow the wrong religion. So anyway, it's a funny point. Anyway, so in essence, long story short, Palestinians are descendants of Canaanites. So they've there for 4,000 years at minimum, right, if not beyond. If that doesn't give someone a right to live on their land, I don't know what does. If that is negated, then all rights to anyone to be native to any place on this planet Earth is negated. And so ultimately, that would be establishing the ancestral aspects of the Palestinians. And as I said, there are too many genetic studies that confirm this. Now, you might think, did we have to wait for today to know these things about, with genetic tests and so on? No. Ben-Gurion himself, who was the first prime minister of the state of Israel, as well as the leader of the Jewish agency, it was before it got independence to become a full state. He discusses in his letters that the Palestinians, he does believe, or he calls them the Arabs, the local Arabs, the farmers and most of the city dwellers do descend from Jews that were farmers 2,000 years ago in Palestine. So they acknowledge that these Arabs or Palestinians, which they obviously don't consider to be part of their people, are actually ancestry from that region. They knew this. It was not a big secret, right? The Zionists never argued that in the past that they were foreign peoples. Only more recently it's been argued, this argument. They didn't stop them. It did not stop them from mistreating them. It didn't stop them from dispossessing their land. It didn't stop them from viewing them as a separate people that you have to be partitioned away from. So ultimately speaking, the Zionists don't really care if the Palestinians are natives to that land, are Canaanites, have been there for as long as anyone else has. I mean, technically longer than European Jews have, because European Jews spent 2,000 years in Europe. That's a long, long time. So they don't ultimately care.
So this is a perfect point for, I think, the next question. So you've kind of established that the Palestinians have a right to the land by virtue of the history and the biology and the genetics and the DNA they've just mentioned.
But I didn't go, sorry, I didn't go into the, you could say, the current international law or legal aspects of it.
For sure.
Right? Because that's, you could say, the other side of the coin here. Because people tend to argue not from genetic rights, for the most part.
Yeah, so what would Jews say, or the Jews that support Israel, and what would the ideologues say, and the Zionists say, and the Israelis say, with regards to their claim that they have a right to all of the land of Palestine? How does that mix in now?
Well, I mean, we're referring specifically to the main pundits of Zionism, so those who believe that Jews have a sovereign and exclusive right to the land of Palestine, or those who believe that Jews should be the rulers of the land of Palestine in some way, shape or form, because they can have minorities, but as long as they are the ruling group. So what they tend to argue is that they have a stronger right than Palestinians to the land, and they have a right to return to that land, and they have a right to self-determination. Now, they cite the argument of self-determination. After the era of empires, it was argued that the best way to organize the world was nationalism, was each nation has a right to self-determination via its own political unit, as best as possible. With some exceptions, if they are a minority group within a certain territory, then they have what's called an internal right to self-determination, which is that they have the right to be represented in government and vote and so on. But if they are the majority group, then they have the right to external self-determination, which is that they determine the foreign policy and they determine the state's security, because they are the ones who are the majority group. It was the best way they could fit their post-imperial age, was nationalism, nation states. That's the new paradigm. So in this argument, which was specifically created by the Allies after World War I, was we want to change the world from empires. The British probably say, not us, but everyone else, yes. Although they view themselves as, we're going to help everyone to become independent. We're the training wheels for them, and we will support them in this endeavor at some undetermined point in the future. But we'll give them independence. But the argument was that everyone has a right to self-determination, and that was the key basis behind all political rights. This was denied the Palestinians, right? And it was denied the Palestinians because the British government had promised the land of Palestine to Zionists to say, well, this is for a Jewish national home. And how do we reconcile this with the fact that, well, the majority of people that live there haven't been consulted, would probably object to it. And this kind of could possibly, or indeed most likely, will impinge their right to self-determination, which they had. They made an exception to this. So, for example, Lord Balfour, obviously infamous for the Balfour Declaration that indicated British government's official backing of the idea of a national home in Palestine for Jews. He argued, and he admitted this was in 1919, so about 2 years after the Balfour Declaration, but he admitted that this was a weakness of their, you could say, international arguments for their policy in the region. He said this: the weak point of our position, of course, is that in the case of Palestine, we deliberately, and as he calls it, rightly, declined to accept the principle of self-determination. If the present inhabitants were consulted, they would unquestionably give an anti-Jewish verdict. Our justification for our policy is that we regard Palestine as being absolutely exceptional. that we consider the question of the Jews outside of Palestine as one of world importance, and that we conceive the Jews to have an historic claim to a home in their ancient land, provided that home can be given them without either dispossessing or oppressing the present inhabitants. In fact, the Zionist organization, the branch based in London, that would later be called the World Zionist Organization, but prior to that it was just called the Zionist Organization. They released a missive during this time, arguing they were worried that America might take control of Palestine. And at that time, Woodrow Wilson was the president of the United States, and he was talking about self-determination and democracy. He wanted to spread that. That was, he thought, was a good international policy for America to begin doing at that point in time. They argued that they actually don't want to see America take over Palestine because they're worried that the American public declaration of democracy and self-determination would apply in Palestine. And they said that democracy in the sense has been called the melting pot in which the quantitatively lesser is assimilated into the quantitatively greater. This doubtless is natural in America and works on the whole very well. But if the American idea were applied as an American administration might apply it to Palestine, what would happen? The numerical majority in Palestine today is Arab, not Jewish. Qualitatively, it is a simple fact that the Jews are now predominant in Palestine, qualitatively obviously, but not in quantity. And given proper conditions, will be predominant quantitatively also in a generation or two. But if the crude arithmetical conception of democracy were to be applied now or at some early stage in the future to Palestine conditions, the majority that would rule would be the Arab majority, and the task of establishing and developing a great Jewish Palestine would be infinitely more difficult. So they indeed argued actually against democracy. No, not democracy for Palestine, because we would be the minority at this point in time. We need time to colonize it, to come in great numbers and so on, and eventually develop it. And even in a meeting with the advisors...
So just, I don't want to interject, but just like what's happening now with regards to the genocide, and, you know, international law has been broken, rules-based order, world order has been broken, the kind of ideological principles that they believe to be these kind of intellectual holy cows have been dismantled and burnt. We think, you know, the genocide in Gaza is a kind of, you know, proof of that. But they dismantled all of the principles from the very beginning. The Balfour with the exception, the Americans saying about, you know, let's forget about democracy from that perspective. So it's like they create the intellectual gods in the morning and then they eat them in the evening, right? It's just so fascinating. I've never ever heard that before. That's a brilliant quote, actually. And it just goes to show they've been breaking principles and breaking their so-called ideological foundations for the very beginning for something that is oppressive and unjust.
Well, indeed, that's the issue. You could say the original sin, to use a Christian term, of the whole matter was that Palestinians were denied self-determination for the get-go, and Zionists were in full support of that. Even up until 1947, when the United Nations, Britain referred the matter to the United Nations to talk about the solution for Palestine. Because they didn't want to upset the Arab client regimes, or their populations to be more precise, by publicly supporting the full kind of takeover of Palestine by Zionists. But at the same time, they didn't want to back down from their promise to the Zionists, which had, by this point in time, excessively lobbied for their state. And so they said, okay, you know what? Let the UN deal with it, because we can't reach it, and we don't want to be blamed by anybody, even though everyone blames them for starting this in the first place. But what Ben-Gurion argued in front of the UN committee for resolving the matter of Palestine, initially was a UN committee that was going to look into it and investigate it, and they were doing this, and they took representations from all the different parties and people. And Ben-Gurion gave his representation, and he argued that at 1947, even at that point in time, even during or after, World War II, and despite all the influx of refugees, survivors of the Holocaust from Nazi Germany and other parts of Europe, Jews only numbered about 1/3 of the population of Palestine. They were still a minority. Ben-Gurion went on record saying that the solution is, if not partition, then at least delay democracy. Say, look, maybe we need 10 years where we can maybe constitute the majority. You know, we're hopeful maybe we can get to that majority. So give an administration where democracy is delayed for 10 years while we try to get a majority there. So he's calling for the abeyance of democracy, saying, no, don't apply democracy because we're still a minority. Wait till it favors us and then it's okay to do so. And depending on how you interpret him, it seems to imply that it would be under a Jewish administration for those 10 years. So it'd be under, in essence, an apartheid state with second-class citizenship until Arabs can be a minority, and then they'd be given full democratic rights, but not before that. So Ben-Gurion was public on this. But even, as I said, Mark Sykes, also from the Sykes-Picot Treaty, as well as Arthur Balfour. I mean, Arthur Balfour, there was a discussion he had with some members of the US states, Justice Brandeis, Colonel House, and a guy, Felix Frankfurter, who would become a High Justice, who was a Zionist. They had a discussion with this, and Arthur Balfour, in a particular discussion, mentioned that he was concerned with the public statements of Woodrow Wilson, which was talking to a universal self-determination. And when he was talking to members of the American government about this, they assured him, and I'll try to give, this is actually the minutes of the meeting here. So Mr. Balfour wrote a memorandum to the Prime Minister, and he believed it went to the President of the United States, pointing out that Palestine should be excluded from the terms of reference, referring to self-determination, the new mandate system, League of Nations, because the powers had committed themselves to the Zionist program, which inevitably excluded numerical self-determination. Palestine presented a unique situation. We are not dealing with the wishes of an existing community, but are consciously seeking to reconstitute a new community and definitely building for a numerical majority in the future. So we say we're not dealing with the wishes of the existing community. We want to make a new community that eventually will become a majority, and that is what we want to establish. So they've been very explicit. We need to ignore the Palestinians, ignore their right to self-determination that we've been preaching to the world, because Palestine is a special exception. And when you know why they considered Palestine an exception, it will shock you, and it's not for the reasons you think. Right, you're going to be shocked. We're going to get to that, though. Okay. So anyway, ultimately, it rests on the right of Palestinians to their own state in Palestine. Self-determination is a bedrock of international law. Yes. And it's a bedrock of secular national politics, which is propounded throughout the world. And you don't need to be Einstein to know this. Yeah, of course. But if you need him, here's what he says. Right. What did Einstein say? He said, "It seems to me a matter for simple common sense that we cannot ask to be given the political rule over Palestine where 2/3 of the population are not Jewish. What we can and should ask is a secured binational status in Palestine with free immigration. If we ask more, we are damaging our own cause, and it is difficult for me to grasp that our Zionists are taking such an intransigent position which can only impair our cause." So it's 1946, Einstein said this. So, bro, it seems from the very beginning of this kind of issue, if you like, they broke their own rules, they dismantled the democratic principles, international law, right to self-determination from the very beginning. Now, from that perspective, some audiences will be like, you know what? I don't like Zionism. I don't agree and I don't support the Zionist project.
And many people will become anti-Zionist just by virtue of what you just said, right? If they were unaware. Now that opens the door to a specific question now, right? Which is, well, is being anti-Zionist anti-Semitic, right? I'm proudly anti-Zionist, right? I think every human being should be, by virtue of what you've just said and hopefully what we're going to unpack in the rest of this podcast. So let's make it personal. Hamza is anti-Zionist. Abdullah is anti-Zionist.
Yes.
Alhamdulillah. Welcome. Public. Yes. Does that mean we are anti-Semitic?
Hell no. No. And that's the issue. We should not conflate anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. But Zionists do want to conflate this. And the interesting thing is that when Ben Gurion was actually addressing the UN Committee for resolving the matter of Palestine in 1947, he actually explained this, the Arab position, as he calls it. And he never said that they hate Jews at all. He actually said, I can see where they're coming from. We're invaders. We're foreigners. We speak a different language. I mean, you actually was German or Yiddish. It wasn't Hebrew. Hebrew only came a little bit later, you could say, in terms of they had to reconstruct it. But anyway, it's a long story. So they saw the invaders. They are the majority. They see all their neighbors being given self-determination in their own state, and they want the same. And we are in the way of doing this. So of course, we understand their position. But then he argues that our position is that we have an historical right and we're being persecuted and so on and so forth. So even Ben Gurion, who was actually he's actually in Palestine and he was in the Ottoman Caliphate. So he was there living in Ottoman times. So he actually understood Muslim mentality very well. He didn't say that they hate Jews. It wasn't because they hate Jews at all. He understood it was simple. It's as simple as it is. It's obvious. They are a bunch of European-looking guys speaking European languages, European accents, coming in, usurping the rights of the native, brought in by an imperial power, usurping the rights of the natives to self-determination that they see being given to everyone around them. It's a no-brainer, as they say. Of course they would oppose it. It doesn't matter. The Algerians oppose the French, not because they are, Francophobic. Yeah, but they oppose the French occupation. The Libyans oppose the Italian occupation, right? Not because they're Italiophobic, I don't know, right? It's because they oppose the occupation of their country by these foreigners coming in, speaking European language. They're not one of them. They're coming in and they are dictating terms, and they want to colonize their land and bring their settlers in. It's not because they hate French people or Italian people. It's again a no-brainer. So in this situation, it was the same. Ben Gurion said it. All the early Zionists understood this was the case. It wasn't because of a personal hatred against Jews. But it became the argument used by the Zionists in around 1970s. So 1973, Israeli Foreign Minister Abba Eban says, he actually writes an article in an American Jewish newspaper, or magazine rather, and it was called Our Position in the Human Scheme, talking about arguing where Jews should see themselves in Western civilizations, in the world, and so on and so forth, in the grand scheme of things, so to speak. And it's him that argues that he says one of the chief tasks of any dialogue with the Gentile world, non-Jewish world, is to prove that the distinction between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is not a distinction at all. Anti-Zionism is merely the new anti-Semitism. This is where you see the first argument made that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Now, he argues that the basis is this: if you are a nationalist, which as Muslims we're not, but anyway, but if you're a nationalist, you believe that everyone has a right to self-determination based on their ethnicity and nationhood. So if you believe that every nation has the right for that, but not Jews, then you're racist because you are singling them out, saying, well, you don't have that right. There's two main issues of this. One is that there's actually a debate and has always been a debate amongst Jews, and it still is a debate to this day, whether Jews actually are a nation or a religion. Because even at the time of Arthur Balfour and the government of his time, one member of the cabinet, the only Jewish member of the cabinet, I think Edwin Montagu, opposed Zionism. He said that I'm a British Jew, and to say that Jews belong in Palestine is to say I don't belong in Britain. Right? I'm British, right? And I'm as British as any other British person. I just have a different religion from the majority. But it doesn't mean I'm not British. It doesn't mean I'm not part of the British people as a nation. That is my nation. So he made this very strong argument. And many other Jews have argued similarly that Judaism is a religion. It's not a nation. People wouldn't say Christians are one nation. Right? And many Zionists would argue, they say, you know, why are you opposing the only Jewish country in the world? You know, there are Christian countries, there's Muslim countries. Why are you opposing the only Jewish country? And most people don't realize is that Israel is an aberration in the world in terms of its nationality, how it defines nationality. No country in the world, if you're, let's say, a Ecuadorian Roman Catholic, and you go to Italy or Spain, and you say, well, this is a Roman Catholic country, you're Christian, so I'm, you know, giving my passport. They'll say, no, you're Ecuadorian. You're not Italian or Spanish or Portuguese or whatever. Yeah, I don't care if you're Roman Catholic. You are Ecuadorian. Go back to Ecuador. You're not, you know, you're not a national here. But we follow the same religion. It's the national religion of your state is Christianity or you know, Roman Catholicism. They say, yeah, so what? You're not a national of our country. But in Israel, it's not simply the official religion is Judaism. It's a nation state of the Jewish people, not of the Israeli people. In fact, there was a recent court case about 15 years ago where the Israeli Supreme Court struck out the definition of or Israelis being a nation, right? No, Israel's a nation state for Jews, not nation state of Israelis, right? Because people try to say, well, look, you know, there's different religions here, different ethnic groups. Why can't we all just be Israeli? You know, in France is a nation state of the French people, but French can be anyone. Could be from originally West African or from even, you know, East Asia, wherever, but you become French, you're French, that's it. I said, no, it's a nation state of a specific ethnic group, or as they define it as Jews or a religion, Jews. That is an aberration because you don't find that anywhere in the world. You go to Saudi Arabia and say, hey, I'm Muslim, where's my passport? They will laugh you out of there, if you're lucky. Maybe a few clips on the ear or something for being impertinent, they might say. Like, it doesn't matter if you're Muslim, they don't care, right? They'll simply say, yeah, but you're not a national. You're not a Saudi national. You're not an Egyptian national. You're not a Algerian national. They don't care. So Israel is really an aberration because you never see any other state in the world say, no, we are a nation state to one particular ethnic group and religion. Or either one religion or a particular ethnic group. No, the idea of ethno-nationalism is a dead idea. It died. It died after World War II, thankfully.
Sure.
Right?
On Guard is more than media. It's dawah, defense, and duty. In an age of confusion, we speak truth for the sake of Allah. If you believe this is a cause worthy of reward in this life and the next, then become a guardian. Stand with us and be written among those who strove. Click below to find out more and subscribe to On Guard wherever you get your podcasts. And now, back to the episode. What if, though, they say something like this? They say, well, the Jewish people, whether you consider them a race or a religious group, they have been a persecuted group for hundreds of years. And they may argue, the Zionists may argue, well, you know what, Zionism or the Zionist project is the only project that can protect the Jewish people. Therefore, not supporting that project is anti-Semitic.
Well, I'd like to point out that, you know, because we all remember, you know, how many pogroms against Jews happens in the United States of America. and Holocaust against them. Oh, actually, right, 0. The best country in the world where Jews have enjoyed the greatest protection of their rights, property, and have enjoyed prosperity is actually the United States of America, where, incidentally, the second highest concentration of Jews live in the world after Israel. So you don't see any Iranian missiles fall down on the United States of America. You don't see any Hamas operations against Jews in America. You don't see any PLO or Hezbollah missiles or any of that against Jews in America. In fact, the safest and most comfortable place in the world for Jews is the United States of America. And many Jews have said it. In fact, even during World War II or after World War II, many Jews who went to Palestine used it as a stopping off point to actually apply for a citizenship and go to America from there. So even they understood that, why do you want this arid piece of land in a hostile place where we can just go to America, basically, or Canada as well. Canada as well. Most European countries, they protect Jews pretty good by law. No, there's no pogroms, there's no massacres, and that's really good that they have these protections. All people should be protected from pogroms, massacres, and killing. No one should be killed based on their religion or their race, obviously. But if you're going to look at it, I mean, historically speaking, if there's one place in the world that has been very dangerous for Jews, ancient Israelites, Hebrews, whomever, it's been the Middle East, that the crossroads of nations, crossroads of invading armies. That's the worst place ever, historically speaking. Because you've had Assyrians, Babylonians, Romans, Macedonians, it's all kinds of invaders have been, Crusaders, so you've had all kinds of rampaging armies that have killed Jews going through there. But the best place has actually been elsewhere, at least now anyway, after Christianity has ceased being the ruling power in the West. It's actually been, and the other place where Jews have enjoyed prosperity has been in Muslim lands.
Yes.
All right, under Muslim rule. Now, I remember reading, Maimonides, the famous rabbi and thinker, and also physician as well.
He was the physician of Salahuddin, right?
Oh, you're going to give away the ending there. You give away the ending.
Apologize.
So, like, he basically encountered some heretical sect called the called the Almohads in Spain, and he left Spain and said, these Ismailites, Ishmaelites, how they treat us, it's really bad, and some because this heretical sect believed that Christians and Jews should be forced converted to Islam. Right, so they did that. It was an aberration. They were a splinter group from the rest of Ahl Sunnah, as well as the Abbasid Caliphate. They were a rival caliphate.
Yes.
So where does he go? Where does he seek refuge in? He goes right to the Middle East and becomes the personal physician for Salahuddin, Ayyubi. So clearly, the Muslim, he knew where you're going to get the better treatment.
Well, one would also argue, and I know we're going to address this later, but just to get the intellectual juices flowing, one would argue that the basis of the argument, if that is the argument as well, that this is the only entity that's going to preserve this group of people. Well, if you look at it historically, the only entity that really preserved the Jewish people was under the Islamic model. Like the popular historian Karen Armstrong talks about that the only time that Jews, Muslims and Christians kind of lived peacefully together for the first time was under Islam. But it was the kind of peace where these people weren't really fighting, right? But what the Zionists are doing, it's kind of it's fake. It's a faux peace because they've created a model and a system and an apartheid system and so on and so forth to actually facilitate more trouble. Do you see my point? So by the underlying logic of the argument, they should be saying, well, actually we should be calling for the Islamic model because that has been truly the model that has preserved the Jewish people, but not only preserve the Jewish people, but create a model where they're not fighting. But the Zionists, they claim they're protecting the Jewish people, but they've created a model that actually has created this conflict because of the injustice and oppression and so on and so forth, which leads to the next question. Israeli occupation of the West Bank and of Gaza, it's illegitimate. Many people say this, historians, thinkers, politicians, and so on and so forth. The question I have is, why?
Well, I kind of, in a way, want to finish off that the last question with, again, some interesting point, which is when Theodor Herzl was arguing for what we call political Zionism. So, they find a place for Jews to go where they are safe and they are kept away from persecution. He didn't actually necessarily care where it was. So he thought maybe Argentina was a good place, maybe or Palestine. They both have merits and demerits. He said that, well, Palestine, he's an atheist, by the way. He didn't care about the Bible. He doesn't believe in God. He just thought, well, there's a cultural resonance with many Jews. So Palestine might be a good reason for that, but it's very arid. He himself said that, we're not adapted to hot climates anymore. And when he heard someone mention, maybe we should go back and speak Hebrew and what have you. He said, what Jew can even order a bus ticket in Hebrew? Yeah, because we speak German. He actually wanted German to be the new language of the state, because most of the Jewish supporters he had was basically German. And he was a German speaker himself. So there was two actually Zionisms at the time. One was called territorial Zionism, and one was called, now I suppose, the mainstream or political Zionism. Territorialist Zionism didn't care where Jews could go to get a state. As long as they had a state and they was independent, it's fine. And I've often said that, let's say, we discover there's an island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Let's call it Atlantis. It rises up from the ocean, and it is lush, great climate, loads of resources. It is, the most amazing place to be on planet Earth. Very comfortable, and it's completely empty. There's no people there, right? And then Zionists arrive there, and then they say, well, let's migrate there and form a society or state, what have you. We'd have no opposition to that whatsoever. No problem. Why? Because there's no one there that's being kicked out of their land, being oppressed, being turned into a second-class group or an apartheid system or ethnic cleansing. If it's no one there, but it's a beautiful, lush territory with like the most amazing climate, loads of abundant resources, fertile land, we'd say enjoy. Hey, I might even come for some tourism, and check it out, whatever. But fine, yeah. Like, you've been persecuted by the West. They never really accepted you as one of their own. Fine, we want no issue with that. But that's not what happened. What happened was they see, well, our needs are greater than the needs of another people. And if we have to do very bad things, make exceptions to the rules of general, the human rights we propound and we claim we believe in, then we're going to do it. And even if it means denying their rights and continuing to deny their rights. So this is the thing. And what really causes anti-Semitism is not basically people just hating on the fact that they are oppressing and persecuting Palestinians. What causes anti-Semitism is when they justify what they do by saying, but this is the right of the Jewish people to do this. Right? Say, wait a second, are you saying that to be Jewish is to dominate a land irrespective of other ethnic groups, even if they're the majority? Are you saying this? Because that sounds pretty anti-Semitic to me, right? You have a right to, they often argue, well, our religion says that God gave it to us. I say, so are you saying that you have a right to impose your religion onto other people? You're imposing your religion. They're not Jewish in terms of their beliefs, right? Maybe their ancestry, whatever, but they're not Jewish in their beliefs. And you're saying, well, that because of that, we now have to disregard their rights. We can kick them out, we can remove them, we can isolate them and box them in, put them into fences around them and shoot them if they come within 200 meters of an invisible line that we arbitrarily set. Too bad, right? Well, that's anti-Semitic. And you don't have to be Einstein to realize that. But if you need him, Here's what he says.
Oh, there's another quote.
Another quote, yes.
Wow.
I was not joking about it, right? So Einstein says that when it was talking about the argument that Jews, the best way that Jews can survive is they have a state for themselves. And he says, I for my part do not think so. I believe that the unique durability of the Jewish community is to a large degree based on our geographical dispersion and the fact that we consequently do not possess instruments of power that will allow us to commit great stupidities out of national fanaticism. So the persecutions will never cause us to perish. Referring to any persecution that happened, will never cause Jews to perish. So he actually argued that, with an implication there, that what can endanger Jews is if Jewish nationalists, took power and in the name of Jewishness committed what he called great stupidities out of national fanaticism. And then say, this is what Jews should be doing, should be supporting, and if you criticize us doing these great atrocities or stupidities, you're criticizing what it means to be Jewish. That connects atrocity to being Jewish, and that is anti-Semitic, right? So it actually, in a way, we are the leading anti-Semites. We are against anti-Semitism.
Yeah, we're pro-Semite.
Because we are saying that it's not intrinsically Jewish to do these things. In fact, it's a slur against Jews to connect this national extremism with Jewishness. They're not the same thing.
Absolutely. So from that perspective, the Zionists are the greatest anti-Semites.
Purveyors of anti-Semites.
Yeah.